Okay, today is December the 6th, and I'm Marion Ware, and I'm going to be interviewing Mr. John Cassady, who lives in Finksburg. And John, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being a part of the History Project. Can you just state for future purposes your name and where you live?
John K. Cassady III, and I live at 508 Delview Drive in Finksburg, Maryland.
And if you can, some people refuse to, but if you would tell us your date of birth, that would also be good.
March the 8th, 1941.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Well, John, I know you live in Finksburg, but let's start back at the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Baltimore City, Mercy Hospital. I believe my mother's, that's where I was, my mother told me I was born. Mm-hmm. And lived in Canton most of my grown-up life. Went to a parochial school, Sacred Heart, where the nuns forced me to write with my right hand because I was left-handed. And I subsequently went to Patterson Park High School and graduated in June of 1959 from them.
Well, that was an interesting time, 1959. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to grow up in Baltimore in the late 50s, early 60s?
Well, the period of time, and I often think that it was fortunate enough to live during that period of time. You know, there was no demonstrations as it is today, and some of the other things that the kids get involved in. Mm-hmm. The neighborhoods were very cohesive. If you did something wrong and a neighbor saw you did something wrong, you would be chastised or even given a little whipping. And if you told your parents, you would get it again because they would figure that the neighbor was correct in what they did, not like today where, you know, if it happened, probably somebody wants to sue you.
Yeah. So what kind of activities did you do when you were young and growing up in Baltimore?
Well,
what was
my parents, as far as having a work ethic, mm-hmm. as far as I was concerned, my brother and I both had paper routes. We delivered, I think he delivered in the morning, I delivered in the afternoon. It was a Sun paper. While we were probably in between, you know, in grade school. Then I worked in a Polish grocery store.
So John, we were talking a little bit about your growing up in Baltimore City and you doing a paper route when you were very young. Sort of hard to believe that people in grade school, kids in grade school were doing paper routes. But also talking about your neighborhood and the Polish grocery store. And if you could give us a little bit more of a feel of what that grocery store was like as compared to the kind of grocery stores we have today. I'm sure it must have been small,
well,
correct?
It was on the corner of O'Donnell Street and Robinson. And the grocery store was John Scosless, and the after school during the week, I would go there and 2 or 3 hours up until 6 o'clock at night. Wednesday they were closed, and that was a stocking day. Saturday was basically a 12-hour day that I worked. And I think, if I recall correctly, my salary was like 60 cents an hour. And then Saturday, of course, was the busiest day of the week, where either groceries were filled from people in the neighborhood, depending if they were widows or whatever, and I would deliver the groceries to them, generally depending on how much they had in a wagon, that type of thing. On an average Saturday, I would probably get $15 to $20 in tips.
And what would you do with that money?
My parents, in particular my mother, was very conscious as far as that was concerned. And of course, had bank accounts that we went into, and even went so far as to take in preparation for later on, taking trying to think of the thing as far as a life insurance policy, right? Out on a thing, which up until a couple of years ago I forgot all about until the company called me and then had to, cash it in, that type of thing. But it was very cohesive in the neighborhood, and if you did something wrong, then depending on the individual, you would be punished for it, and maybe not by your parents, but if you told them, you would get it twice, so you would keep your mouth shut. Very little graffiti. I can't remember anything as far as anybody doing graffiti or destruction of property as has happened today.
What about movies or TV or any kind of media the kids did?
The TVs, or the first black and white TVs were probably 12 inches square, if I remember correctly, that came out, and it was only like 3 channels at the time. The movies, we had 2 basic movies in the area. One were in Hollandtown. One was the Patterson movie, and one was the Grand on Conklin Street. That we would go to generally on a Saturday. That was, when I was younger, but once, I was in the high school area, I was working, that type of thing. And then after the grocery store spent, I went to, I was into swimming and eventually became a lifeguard. And that was my summer jobs. I gave that up in, let's see, 1957, 58 period, somewhere around there. And eventually was we had, at the time, the Patterson Park pool, we had lessons in the morning, that type of thing. And eventually I was the head guard at the time I left in 1959, and that's when, knowing that I didn't know what I was going to do in life, decided, because of the draft was still in existence, and knowing that I was faced with, if I was starting something out, at some point in time I would be potentially drafted or whatever, so I wanted to make this.
This was the Vietnam War.
No, well, this is pre-Vietnam, 1959.
Korean? Yeah.
It was after Korea and then before Vietnam. So Vietnam wasn't even in the picture at that particular time. So I decided, because of liking the water and being around the water, I decided either the Navy or the Coast Guard, and did my research on the thing, felt that the Coast Guard was more to my liking than the Navy. So I joined the Coast Guard in 1959 and went to Cape May, New Jersey, which was the boot camp.
Right. And so can you tell us a little bit about your experience in terms of the Coast Guard? Because I think you actually stayed in the Coast Guard quite a while.
Yes. After joining the Coast Guard in through boot camp, we had the base had a base football team, and I had played football and was recruited, even being a recruit, to play ball. So I did that, besides going, to the classes and everything else after work. And upon graduation, I was assigned to basically permanent party at the base, working at the base grocery store and running the base grocery store, which was a very small thing at the time, which was again similar to what I'd been doing when I worked for the Polish grocery store. Was dissatisfied with that and said, this is it. I want to get out and do something else. So the personnel officer, who happened to be the football coach, suggested that, why don't we put you on board ship? We had a reserve training ship, the Coast Guard cutter Unimac, which was the training ship for the reservists. There were 6-month reservists that were on there. So I was assigned to the Coast Guard cutter Unimac as permanent party on there. And I spent 7 months on there until the season started and came back to the base. But the thing is that we made trips, reserve trips to all of the different Caribbean islands during the wintertime. So I was coming back at Christmas time with a tan and that type of thing, having been to Bermuda, the Virgin Islands. We didn't go to Jamaica. I'm thinking St. Thomas.
So what does the Coast Guard do in terms of, when you say go to the islands, I would never think of the Coast Guard as being a part of any kind of service around the Caribbean. So explain to me kind of what was their charge in terms of...
Like I said, it was a training vessel for the recruits, the reservist 6-month recruits that were on there. And of course, the being at sea, to being standing watches, boat drills, all the sundry things that go with lifeboard living on board ship. So every couple of weeks, we would get a new batch of reservists come on. So that's why we were going to these different planes and went to Nova Scotia during the summertime. But after I came back to the base, I was, having had an extensive background when I was in high school in drafting, one of the coaches was in the maintenance division and had mentioned that they had a need for, because up until that point in time, they had been doing 6-month reservists that were filling in. So knowing my background or whatever provided them with some of the stuff that I had done in school, was basically assigned to the maintenance division, excuse me, as the draftsman for the base. So it entailed architectural, general drafting, the whole 9 yards. And then within probably a year or so of doing that particular job, they saw fit that I was going to be sent to Coast Guard headquarters or Coast Guard Yard in the engineering department as far as doing the same thing. But the problem was is that one night in March, the building I was in caught fire. I was in the building when it caught fire. And subsequently, a lot of the original drawings were damaged on the thing and had to be reduplicated. So consequently, they canceled my orders because I was the only one that had some knowledge of the thing and had to redo all this stuff. Up until the time that I got out of the service in 1963, November of 1963. I'll take a drink of water here.
So how did you end up in Carroll County at some point? Was this about a girlfriend or? No. Grew up in Canton. While I was on the state police, moved to Catonsville and grew up in, well, my kids grew up in Catonsville. My son in particular moved to Carroll County, was in Hampstead, so we were in Catonsville like 30-some years or whatever, and in order to be closer to the grandkids and that type of thing, we decided that we're going to move to Carroll County, which we did in 2003. Now, how did you go from Coast Guard to state police?
Well, after leaving the state police, after leaving the Coast Guard, excuse me, I was, like I said, a draftsman and had a job before I came out of the service with the B&O Railroad in their engineering department down Charles Street, downtown. And I was a young buck in the office and had been experienced to like several $1 million in construction that I was involved with the architects and the builders at the Coast Guard base when they were building new barracks and that type of thing, and saw some of the new technology, and was given some information as far as this technology was concerned. What the B&O Railroad was still working in the 1800s insofar as their thought process and everything. And being the young guy on the block, I didn't know what I was talking about. Well, I was disenchanted with the doing that. And one of the fellows in the office was, his cousin was on the state police out of Annapolis, and I thought, man, that'd be a neat job. So I did my homework and applied, and went into the academy in July of 1965, and then finished up in January '66, after that, was assigned to the Annapolis Barrack and eventually the Glen Burnie Barrack. And spent just about my whole career in Anne Arundel County between those two and then the airport. As far as the airport division at that time took over, and the state police ran that operation for some period of time before Department of Transportation then came involved. And during that period of time, in I'm thinking 1972 period, somewhere around there, I ran into somebody that I had been in the Coast Guard with and stayed. And he stayed because the Coast Guard yard was very close to my assignment in Anne Arundel County. And I had some interaction at different times with them. Excuse me, my throat.
Go ahead.
And he was saying that they were looking for people in law enforcement background to come back into the reserves with what they call port security, which did with the operation of foreign flag ships coming into the port of Baltimore. And I said, I was reluctant at that particular point in time of doing so, and then they decided to come back in, the Coast Guard. And in the reserves, you'd have what they call drill weekends. And of course, drill weekends were sort of weekends for me in the police department were few and far. You only got maybe one a month. So consequently, I made the suggestion of doing my drill, what they call drill days, 2 drill days a month during the week when I had more time off, and with the regular side of the house at the custom house. And they went for it and said that, and not only that, I was able to gain much more experience insofar as the regular side of the house, what they were doing, almost doing the same functionality, besides which they gleaned off of me as far as being in the police department, as far as getting things. And there were certain things that I could do that they could do, they couldn't do. And one in particular, as far as the ships were concerned, we had a manifest as far as what they were carrying and what hole they were in and that type of thing. And I decided that, I was going to verify, is what you're telling me true? So some of the regular side of the house was reluctant to do this. Of course, I was a reserve and more curiosity than anything else. And in doing so, in one particular case, I climbed down about 3 or 4 different holes and found some automobiles in the bottom of the hole, which are not on the manifest. And they happened to have New York tags on them. So after I came back out, I called the barrack and said, run these tags for me, and all the cars wound up being stolen. So they were going to be transported on board ship out of the country, stolen automobiles. That was just one aspect. Oh. And then in 1972, I think, somewhere around that period of time,
well, go back to that story. So what happened in terms of once you discovered that, and did you go back and? Oh,
we held up the ship. We held up the ship, made them take everything off the ship, and then they took the automobiles off the ship. We basically impounded them for New York. Right. And then, of course, the FBI got involved in because it was a federal offense under, crossing state lines and that type of thing. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's pretty exciting. I mean, is that the kind of thing? What attracted you? Because it seems like you have done so many things in your life, different things, and you've certainly been competent at a lot of them. What was it that attracted you to? What was it that you liked about the state police, or what kind of expertise do you think you're really good at that? You enjoyed doing? I hear you talking about being curious, but I also...
after coming on to the job and doing the variety of different things we did, and back during that period of time, unlike what has evolved today, we were called what a full-service barrack, which means we handled everything. We handled armed robberies, we handled thefts, domestic complaints, you name it, we handled it, even though we had a Anne Arundel County Police that we cooperated with also. So that was one thing, and after getting into this, you would, just the nature of the work that you would be, you know, if you question somebody, you know, prove it to me. And the other thing is that the variety, every time you went to work, even though there may be similarities, things would be different as far as different situations and that occur over time. And that's
it's
generally
a challenge.
It was every day, as was the case, was different. And in fact, at some point in time, I considered writing a book. I had picked the title out to my book, but I've never followed through. And my title of the book was going to be "The Unusual Was the Routine." So, getting back to the 1972 was the time the Coast Guard realized that they had a nucleus of police personnel that could augment their intelligence group, their what they call agents. And they put out a solicitation as far as creating a reserve special agent program to supplement the regular side of the house. And I put in for it, was selected, along with, excuse me, several others that were also in the state police with me that were in the reserves. And from that point on, I didn't wear a uniform. I was civilian clothes because a lot of the stuff I did was background investigations for security clearances, and a whole sundry of different things. And of course, being so close to the Coast Guard yard, the regular agent who then became familiar with me and my workings and connections and everything, I would get phone calls during the week if I could stop by the office and assist him on either interviews or something of this nature, or questions about, you know, different offenses, or getting a second opinion on the thing. And I was basically giving federal credentials as a special agent in the Coast Guard Investigative Service. Everybody has seen probably the program NCIS that they publicize on TV. Well, the Coast Guard CGIS is basically doing the same thing, but it takes more than an hour to do it, that they do it on TV. And subsequently, that was some of the stuff that I did. I went to the 2 presidential inauguration details as an agent to supplement the Secret Service.
Who were they?
That was President Jimmy Carter, which I swore at that time I would never do it again. But then Ronald Reagan was made president, and I said, yes, I will do this again. I've been to, was assigned vehicles with dignitaries and that type, like a dignitary protection type of thing. Went to several inaugural balls on the thing. We were sent to
That's pretty exciting.
Sent to the Olympics in 1984.
Wow.
And it was in a sundry of different things that happened over a period of time. And after I decided to retire from the state police, I had 21 years, 4 years of my initial military time, counted at 25. So I retired in 1986. From that, worked with setting up a security operation with, because they were a governmental contractor, defense contractor at AI Corporation in Cockeysville. Set up their security operation, and of course was bored with doing some of that. And then they put a solicitation out for any reserve agents, Coast Guard reserve agents that would want to come back on active duty for a period of 2 years. So I put in a request for that to take military leave from the company, not cutting any ties in case I needed to come back. And put in for and got 2 years of active duty as the second agent in the Baltimore office at the Coast Guard Yard. Well, 2 years passed by, and they came and said, well, you want to stay 2 more years? I said, yeah, I'll stay 2 more years. So I stayed 2 more years. And 2 more years went by, and then they said, well, we can't give you 2 more years, but we can give you another year. So I took another year. So that was from, what, 87 to 92, which is additional 5 years of active duty time. So I had basically 9 years of active duty broken in between that time. After doing that, and had a sundry of different assignments that I did with that. I had one murder investigation that I did out of Key West, Florida, that the complainant's parents claimed that he was killed, but I basically told him it was a suicide. And that the kid involved was basically had some drinking problems. Mm-hmm. I think at the time of death, I think he had a 3/4 blood alcohol. And the other thing that was interesting that I had never gotten into, he was into satanic, into Satanism. Had a lot of the symbolisms of Satan, snakes, and a whole bunch of other things. That was one of the interesting cases. The other thing was they sent me to a lot of schooling, and so far as investigative schooling, that I was not able to get in the state police unless I paid for it myself. So at the end of the 5th year, coming up on the 5th year, I think it was like September, I was asked to do some research for one of the regular side of the house, who were the corporate officers in a major oil pollution case, and knew that there was corporate records at the state office building and everything else. So I went to get those for them and gave it to them the next day. Well, they thought it was a big deal. Well, if you know where to go, it's no big deal. So, I brushed it off. The next day, I get a phone call from the commander who was in charge of the investigation. Investigation at the Marine Safety Office at the Coast Guard and Custom House, and said, "What are you going to do after your time is up in December?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I got some feelers out. I'll find something." And he said to me that, well, there's a civilian position that is opening up because the guy is transferring to the Washington office at the Regional Exam Center at the Custom House in Baltimore. I said, I questioned, what is the Regional Exam Center? Well, the Regional Exam Center is the office that basically does the evaluation as to who is going to get a Coast Guard license. And the Coast Guard license would vary from those running a charter boat operation off of Ocean City to operate in the deep sea tankers. Mm-hmm. And I told him, I said, I don't know anything about licensing. He said, well, you can learn. I said, yeah, I've learned a lot of things in my life. So anyway, I went and applied. I only had 2 days or 3 days to apply for the thing, and was interviewed and then basically selected before my time ran out in December. And then my boss at the time basically waived the additional time and gave me an early out to be the assistant chief of licensing. So I had a staff of, at that time, I guess it was around 15, some military and the rest were civilian. And of course, the regulations were depending on the civilians and the military were different as far as taking leave and that type of thing, where the military had to take it in day increments, where the civilians could take it in hourly increments and that type of thing. And it was just two different things as far as to do. So eventually, My boss at the time was military. And of course, because of the military situation where you got a new person coming in every 4 years, and it was like a training phase. By the end of the 4 years, he was just learning what to do. He was leaving, so somebody new was coming in. So basically, they saw fit to convert the military position to the civilian position. So what happened was I was then made the chief of the Regional Exam Center as a civilian because of the longevity and that type of thing. And then I had military people, officers that were my assistants, generally lieutenants, lieutenant JGs. My last one was a lieutenant commander who was my assistant.
I want to touch on something that I've sort of noticed throughout your telling of this story, and something you said earlier, which is it seems to me that you've had a long history of work in various fields with various people, but you have been extremely successful in being able to transition, so change and transition and get jobs. And I think some of it might be in your ability to network and to know people and to get along with people. And I'm just wondering if you want to talk a little bit about that, and more even in terms of sort of things that you would encourage young people to develop as some of their talents as far as job seeking in this new world.
Well, the one thing I would say is that don't be impulsive and burn your bridge. When you decide to leave, try to leave as far as on good terms, because it may come back to haunt you in the future. And once, for instance, is that for clearances, when we did a clearance for a security clearance for somebody, and I did either a neighborhood or an employment or that type of thing, one of the employment things and questions would be, would everything being equal, would this person be eligible for employment? And if they wouldn't answer that question, I knew something was wrong. Mm-hmm. In most of the cases, they said yes, they would be eligible for employment on a thing. But that was one of the things that was a key thing that would be telling me, you know, there's some issues here that either they had some problems or whatever, which would be negative because a lot of them wouldn't want to divulge that information with the possibility of repercussions as far as on the company or whatever. The other thing is that the kids today don't seem to want to try anything out of their comfort zone. The big thing is that if something comes up, an opportunity comes up, even though it may be in your comfort zone, you might want to give it a try because you might wind up liking it. It might be turned into a career that you, unbeknownst to you at that time, will turn out, you know, to be. That would be the big thing.
It sounds like you were very open about that you tried a lot of things, and even things that you found you were bored, you found something else
right.
that interested you.
The other thing is getting along with people. Is probably another thing as far as another trait. And of course, a lot of it came from a lot of the things in the state police. As far as they preached, basically, if you give respect, you'll get respect. So consequently, you didn't get into as many altercations and fights with the citizens and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And in one instance, I remember in probably my first year or 2 years on the job, one of the things was, again, politeness. Yes sir, no sir, that type of thing. And when somebody would get, depending on their level, would get nasty with me, I would go into my polite mode. Yes sir, no ma'am, yes ma'am, that type of thing. And I had a gentleman from New Jersey that was, I stopped for basically speeding on the B&W Expressway. And also, following too close. Following too close was, to me, a bully situation besides whatever you would be doing. And that was a pet peeve with me. So I gave him a ticket for the following too close and a warning for the speeding rather than 2. Well, he was mouthing off at me and everything else and didn't deserve this and wasn't following too close in the whole 9 yards. So about a month later, I came to work and my sergeant says, Cassady, we got a complaint. I says, oh, okay. And he says, the guy from New Jersey. I says, I remember this. Well, the gentleman writes in there that he did not deserve the ticket and everything else, and the trooper was obnoxiously polite.
Obnoxiously polite. And what did they say to you about being obnoxiously polite? Did they send you to school?
No, they laughed, and I think I got it in some of my records or somewhere or another, but they thought it was quite funny as far as how can you be obnoxiously polite. But just one incident. But like I said, I guess it's just in my personality. Like my wife says, that you can go anywhere and within an hour or whatever, not knowing anybody, be able to, to talk to people. And that particular thing, as far as networking, I believe is a big thing. In that, if you establish a network of people that know you, know your strengths, weaknesses, or whatever, can then, unbeknownst to you in some cases, assist you later on, because in quite a few of the jobs that I had, I did not go looking for them. They came looking for me through somebody that knew me, knew what was going on in my life. And subsequently, went from there.
John, is there anything else that you want to talk about or that you think is important in terms of sort of remembering? I mean, it's an incredible diversity of experiences you've had over your lifetime, and very interesting kinds of...
My last big case before and again, with the Regional Exam Center, I just spent 21 years there. I just retired in 2003 after spending 21 years at the Regional Exam Center with the licensing aspect that, and of course the differences and things that occurred. But my last big case with when I was an agent with the Coast Guard, before taking this particular job, we had an informant on a drug freighter that was coming up the East Coast, and we didn't know where it was going to wind up and where the offload is going to take place. Anyway, we found out that the offload did take place off of New Jersey, and the offload was 5 tons of cocaine. And the fishing vessel that took the offload belonged to John Gotti's son.
Oh my gosh.
So we later found the vessel in the Delaware Bay, and subsequently did the search, and through the search we developed all kind of intel information on the thing. And one of the things was in one of the cabins I found undeveloped 35 millimeter film. Well, I gave it was an interaction between us and the customs, and I gave it to the custom agent, who then was the main prosecution as far as the case was concerned. And I wound up getting called to testify in New York on the case involving the 5 Colombians that were on this vessel. And one of the things is that when the agent called me, I said, "Did you get the 35 millimeter film developed?" And he says, "What film?" I says, "Well, it's in that package that we gave you as far as the search." And I said, "You'll find some information, some interesting information on it." Well, what these drug people do, especially coming out of Colombia, is they take pictures of themselves in the offload operation. And the reason being is they take it back with them to Colombia to show them that we made the transfer, otherwise their demise may be forthcoming. So that was one of the most interesting ones, I would have to say, as far as you know, that period of time. But
it sounds like you had a very interesting job and career.
Yeah. It wasn't. I never got a chance to get bored.
Yeah, good. I don't think you're ever going to retire. Doesn't sound like it.
No. My wife has been on me about you know, volunteering and doing things. And of course, with the most recent back operation on the thing. And she said, well, you know, I was a swimming instructor in my youth and when I was in my 20s and whatever. And she said, well, why don't you keep going to the Y? Why don't you go to the Y? Why don't you go to the Y? So I finally went down to the Y, and I said, do you guys have a need for a swimming instructor? And she says, oh, yeah. She said, he called the aquatic guy over, and he's talking to me and giving me all this spiel, and he says, and I said, are you offering me a job? He says, yeah. I said, no, I want to volunteer. I don't want another job. So that's where that stands, and I got the pamphlet and all this other business to fill out, that I'm not a child abuser and that type of thing, as far as you have to go through this sundry investigation and that type of thing. Yeah. So that's but you know, catching up on my honeydews around the house and that type of thing.
Well, that'll keep
but
you busy.
This thing has really impeded what I like to do. As my wife says, I'm going to wear out, not rust out. So.
Thank you, John. Thank you for coming in today.
You're welcome.